This lecture is part 2, where we are still looking at the influences on nutritional status and the effects of diet in the development of different conditions. So we've already gone through in a lot of detail the relationship between nutrient intake and the development of diet-related disorders, specifically obesity, diabetes type 2, and cardiovascular disease. Now, you might be asked a specific question in your HSC where you're talking about the foods that are ingested and how they can contribute to the development of these diet-related disorders. And we've already covered that off in a lot of detail. The purpose of our lecture today is to have a look at food sensitivities, intolerances, and allergies, and how different foods can lead to the development of different conditions within an individual that has a food sensitivity. So the foods an individual chooses to eat has a major role in influencing their nutritional status. And although some dietary disorders like diabetes, cardiovascular disease can be hereditary, individuals need to pay close attention to their diet. So in our previous lecture, we did have a look at the specific nutrients that can lead to the development of these disorders. Now, it's a really important message that by having a balanced diet that corresponds with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating and covers off the 5 food groups, will mean that an individual is able to get adequate amounts of nutrients. And as a result, this contributes to overall good health. However, this is the individual choice, okay? And health is determined by the individual. Despite the information, despite the media, despite all of the advice given by health, an individual ultimately chooses what foods they eat, and ultimately they can determine whether or not they have good health. So having a look at food sensitivities in more detail, because that is going to be the focus of our lecture today, it's important to understand that food sensitivities is an umbrella term. And as you can see, there are 2 types of food sensitivities. There's allergies and there are intolerances, and they are very different. Now, some people in society experience adverse reactions after consuming a specific food product, and this is what a food sensitivity is. It's where an individual is sensitive to a particular food or combination of foods, or a protein or a chemical in foods, and this adverse reaction is known as a food sensitivity. Now, as mentioned, the 2 types of food sensitivities are allergies and intolerances. Now, as we go through the next few slides on allergies and intolerances, it's really important that you keep in mind this point at the top of the slide. So typically, students are required to note the differences between allergies and intolerances. And although they are both classified as food sensitivities, you need to be aware of the key differences between the 2, and also the key differences in diagnosing whether somebody has an allergy or an intolerance. So we'll start with what is a food allergy. A food allergy occurs when the body's immune system responds to a specific food protein. This protein is referred to as an allergen, and the body incorrectly identifies the allergen as a dangerous foreign protein. So some of the key things here: an allergy involves the immune system, and it also involves the body responding to a specific protein. These are 2 key facts that do relate specifically to an allergy. An allergy involves the immune system, whereas an intolerance does not involve the immune system. An allergy is a response to an allergen, which is a protein, whereas an intolerance is not in response to a protein, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So because the immune system is involved, antibodies are produced by the body in order to destroy the food protein. And this reaction between the allergen and the antibodies causes the symptoms of an allergy, which can be really dramatic and life-threatening. Now, this is another important point. An allergy is a life-threatening condition, and if it is life-threatening, it means that the individual is experiencing something called anaphylaxis. Now, we'll talk about anaphylaxis in a little bit more detail. So anaphylaxis is a condition where an individual is experiencing an extreme allergy that is life-threatening. And the reason why it is life-threatening is because the airways actually swell up. And the swelling of the airways actually stops the person from breathing. Now, the only way to manage this is through the administering of an EpiPen. And an EpiPen is needed because it contains adrenaline, which will in turn temporarily allow air to pass through the airways, and it will temporarily cease and slow down that swelling. However, an ambulance needs to be called and 000 called, because otherwise that person could die. So it is a life-threatening condition. Now, another key point here is that even tiny amounts of an allergen can trigger anaphylaxis. So the person that has the allergy cannot ingest the protein in any quantities, and sometimes it can even be super sensitive and be an airborne reaction. Now, these are the most common food allergens that people in society suffer from. So we have peanuts, tree nuts, egg, milk, seafood, sesame, wheat, and soy. And we will learn that according to the Food Standards Australia-New Zealand Act of 1991, these common food allergens by law must be labelled. And the reason why is because it gives people the information they need to manage their allergic reaction. And because it is a very serious life-threatening condition, this information must be provided to consumers. So this slide goes through the different symptoms of a food allergy, and you'll notice that a range of different bodily systems are involved. Although the immune system primarily is involved through the release of those antibodies to destroy the protein in the food, a range of other systems are also triggered. So the respiratory system, particularly with wheezing, sneezing, and the closing of the airways, the gastrointestinal tract, which can lead to vomiting and stomach pains and diarrhea. The skin can be triggered, so rashes, swelling, itchiness, eczema, and hives, and the nervous system or the brain can be triggered through irritability. So these are the common symptoms of food allergies: wheezing, sneezing, stomach pains, diarrhea, swelling, rash, mouth ulcers, and vomiting. So how would somebody identify that they have a food allergy, and then how would they manage it once it has been identified? Food allergy reactions occur immediately after the allergen-containing food is consumed, and this enables the possible causes to be identified. Therefore, it makes it easier to actually identify an allergy than it does an intolerance because of the onset of those symptoms immediately. Now, a range of different confirmation tests are conducted to ensure that the person is allergic to the protein. Now, the first one is a skin prick test. Now, this is used to confirm whether the suspected food is the actual cause of the allergy. And this test shows whether the individual has specific antibodies to a specific food protein by pricking the surface of the skin, usually on the forearm, with a solution of the suspected food. So multiple suspected allergens can be tested at the same time. So as skin. If antibodies are present for a specific food, a wheal, which is a raised lump-like mosquito bite, forms where the skin was pricked. Now, if the result of the skin prick test is unclear, a supervised food challenge can be done to observe the individual's physical reaction to a specific food allergen. And what happens is that person is placed in a controlled environment, such as an allergy clinic. And the person is given the food that is suspected to contain the protein that they're allergic to under controlled conditions. The reason why the conditions are controlled and closely monitored is because it is life-threatening. So they would have medical support to manage the situation if the person did develop an anaphylactic response to the protein. I'll show you the next slide. So this is an example of a skin test, a skin prick test, that identifies the specific allergens that are causing symptoms in an individual. Now, these wheals that develop are when a person has reacted to some of the antigens or the proteins in the solution. So you can see here on the forearm, there is a stamp, and each part of the grid indicates where a different food antigen or a different protein is tested in the solution. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, these are the results. So the swelling or the wheals, as it says here, that are developed, and that redness and that swelling indicates that the person has developed antibodies to respond to those proteins, which indicates that the immune system has been triggered, which indicates the person has an allergy. Go back to this slide, you'll notice that a range of different allergens are actually placed on the forearm of the. So once a specific allergen has been identified as the cause of symptoms, a long-term management plan is needed for the individual to prevent a life-threatening reaction. Someone with an allergy needs to ensure complete avoidance of any food that contains even small amounts of the allergen. And this is something that is very specific to an allergy, and it's quite different to an intolerance. a person with an allergy cannot have even the smallest amount of that protein. As mentioned, the Food Standards Code under the Food Standards Australia New Zealand Acts of 1991 requires that all food companies list all the ingredients in a food product used in processing, and there is mandatory labelling of the most common 7 allergens. Many people, however, who are highly allergic will often have allergies to several different things, and children's response to allergens such as egg and milk can lessen with age, as the body becomes desensitized to the allergen over time. However, nuts, including peanuts and fish allergies, often persist into adulthood. We're now going to spend some time looking at celiac disease, which is an immune reaction to gluten. Now, celiac disease is a condition where the presence of gluten damages the lining of the small intestine. The small intestine has villi which absorb nutrients, and gluten actually damages the villi, which means that over time, different diseases of malnutrition may emerge. What is gluten though? Gluten is a protein found naturally in grains including wheat, barley, and rye. The damage caused to the intestinal lining means that the gut cannot absorb nutrients properly, leading to nutritional deficiencies. And continuing exposure to gluten increases the risk of developing different types of cancer, and specifically a type of gut cancer. Now, to determine if somebody has the symptoms of celiac disease, the following list is usually reviewed. So there are often gut symptoms like abdominal cramping and nausea, diarrhea or flatulence, which is the accumulation of gas, as well as signs of malnutrition like weight loss, anemia, or osteoporosis. And the reason why these specific diseases will emerge is because minerals in the diet, like calcium in the development of osteoporosis and iron for the development of anemia, are not being absorbed properly. And as a result, these deficiency diseases may emerge. Now, to determine if somebody has celiac disease or the immune reaction to gluten, a blood test can indicate. However, the only definitive way of determining if somebody has celiac disease is actually by doing a biopsy and taking a sample of part of the intestinal lining to see if there's been any disruption to the villi. Once diagnosed, however, celiac disease can be managed. However, a strict diet is needed, and all foods that do contain gluten must be avoided. The next few slides goes through a range of foods that should be avoided in the different types of food groups for an individual that has celiac disease. For example, if somebody is consuming meat, then they need to actually watch out for processed meats like meat pies and frozen dinner, as well as sausages, because these often contain fillers that contain things like breadcrumbs, and breadcrumbs and fillers contain traces of gluten. So foods that can be included are fresh meats, canned meats, smoked or frozen meats that don't contain sauces or crumbs, as well as bacon and ham. So spend some time having a look at this list. Another point is, what about grains and flours and bread and rice and those cereals that people in society would normally include in their diet for complex carbohydrates? That's a good point. It's important to note that rice does not contain gluten, and neither does corn. So these are 2 really good examples of complex carbohydrates that can still provide fiber and energy in the diet without compromising the health of the individual who, if they do have celiac disease, they can't be having these grains. So on this list, you can see a further list of the different foods that should be avoided and should be included in the diet, depending on the type of food and the food group. So we will now spend some time doing the questions that relate to this part of the syllabus, and these questions are from past HSC exams. So the first question is out of 5 marks, and it's asking you to name, which means to list, 5 of the most common food allergens. So it's important that you can remember the common food allergens, as you might get a question like this in the exam. So spend some time just thinking about what those allergens are and write them down. So these are some of the allergens that you might have included on your list. So peanuts, soy, eggs, sesame, tree nuts, and shellfish. So these are 5 of, well, this is more than 5, but some of these you could include as 5 of the most common food allergens. And to get the 5 marks here, you only need to talk about, or you only need to actually list 5, and you don't need to elaborate any further. The next question we're going to look at is a question that is worth 4 marks. And I'm going to unpack this exemplar response so that you can see how you would actually answer this question if you did receive it in an exam. And I actually might ask you to answer this question and to submit it for feedback so that you can actually work out if you're on the right track. However, we're going to look at the exemplar now. So the question is asking you to define a food allergy and to describe how it is diagnosed. So it's important to know that there are actually two verbs in this question. The first one is define. So you need to provide a definition for what an allergy is. Now, to obtain the 4 marks, it needs to be a detailed definition, and you should have an example to support your response. The second part of this question is asking you to describe. Now, when we describe, we need to look at the characteristics and features of something. It's not as detailed as an explanation, but it's more detailed than an outline or an identify style question. So it's asking you how an allergy is diagnosed. So you would have to work out the different types of tests and actually describe the characteristics and features of those tests in your response. So we're now going to spend some time having a look at this exemplar response and see how it answers the question in detail. So the first part of the question is addressing the definition of a food allergy. So our definition is, allergies are food sensitivities that are life-threatening. They involve an immune response to a specific protein in a food and produce instant symptoms. A person with an allergy cannot have any quantity of the protein, as it could lead to anaphylaxis. So we can see here, if we go back to our definition, this is a very, very detailed definition for an allergy. And there is a lot of SST or subject-specific terminology that has been included in the response. So the terms food sensitivity, life-threatening, immune response, protein, symptoms, anaphylaxis. These are all examples of subject-specific terminology which indicate knowledge and understanding. We'll now go and have a look at the second part of the question and see how this addresses the question, or the second part of the question, describe how it is diagnosed. So it says the most common methods of diagnosing include the skin prick test or the food challenge. This involves placing a sample of a series of proteins on the forearm and determining if there is a visible reaction, for example, redness or swelling. Examples of allergens include peanuts, eggs, and shellfish. So again, we can see here a very, very detailed response and a very, very detailed description providing the characteristics and features of diagnosing an allergy. So some of the SST that is included: skin prick test or food challenge. These automatically address the question because those are the two accurate ways of diagnosing an allergy. The word diagnosing has also been included in the response, which means that this student is actually answering this question specifically. Now, the characteristics and features of a skin prick test have been included. So, placing a sample of a series of proteins on the forearm and determining if there is a visible reaction, for example, redness or swelling. This describes how the skin prick test works, which is addressing the how it is diagnosed part of the question. Again, as food tech students, we need to make sure we're always including examples. So this question has clear examples included of those common allergens that are often used in a skin prick test. So peanuts, eggs, and shellfish. So this is a very, very detailed response, and it is a way that you can determine how you are going if you use this response to mark yourself in the future.